Welcome to Insights Fusion podcast, where we dig deep into AI, business, technology, entrepreneurship, and try to steal good ideas for ourselves and how can we improve our own business. I'm your host, Vygandas Pliasas. I work as fractional CTO, as management consultant for over 18 years already, and been working with large leading companies across the UK and the US. In each episode, we talk with high end, smart guests that have achieved something in business, in AI, in their startups, and try to get some practical insights to ourselves, the audience. Today, with me, we have Hunter Jensen, who's the founder and CEO of Barefoot Solutions, a digital agency specializing in artificial intelligence, data science, and digital transformation. With over 20 years of experience, Hunter has worked with startups and Fortune 500 companies, including Microsoft and Salesforce, to implement innovative technology strategies that drive measurable return of investment. A seasoned leader and expert in the AI space, Hunter helps businesses harness cutting edge technologies to achieve growth and efficiency. So, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Vygandas. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So, tell me more. What is it you do?
Yeah, well, that was a very great introduction, and I appreciate it. I'm the founder CEO of Barefoot Solutions. I've been doing this for going on 20 years. Our story or my story started when I was still in college. I was picking up freelance PHP development gigs on Craigslist, to date myself a little bit. After that, came out to San Diego and formally founded my agency, Barefoot Solutions. We started off as a web development shop, building WordPress websites for small businesses. This is early 2000s. Then we got involved in mobile app development really early on, like within a month of the App Store coming online. We had our first app in the store. So that really fueled our growth during that phase. And then we got into, connected devices, Internet of Things, medical device apps, things like that. Then a little further down the road, we got into blockchain and crypto, and when that was hot, we were pretty deep into that. And then I want to say maybe 6 or 7 years ago, we did our first machine learning project. So we've been in the, for lack of a better word, the AI space long before ChatGPT kind of opened the eyes of the world to some of the things that we actually already knew were coming and were already there. And so, that's what we do at Barefoot is we do custom technology implementations for enterprise, for startups, for medium-sized businesses. What I do personally as the CEO is, I've mentioned 5 or 6 different technologies there over the last 20 years. My biggest job is figuring out what the next one is.
Interesting.
So when we made, a very deliberate and concerted shift to focus on data science 6 or 7 years ago, that was, nailed it. That was me being a CEO and trying to look ahead and predict where things are going and make sure we're ahead of that curve. That's how we've stayed relevant this whole time. We don't adopt, we'll call it the bleeding edge stuff, because companies don't really spend money on that most of the time, unless you're in an R&D department.
Very fast.
Right. But once things are ready to be kind of commercialized and they're ready for production environments and companies are ready to spend money on stuff, we want to make sure that we're already there and we already have the experience and expertise to build and roll things out that are ready for prime time, ready to generate a return on investment.
Interesting. So you're a technical person,
I
technical
am,
CEO.
yeah. So I'm a recovering developer. Uh, I still am involved in system architecture, kind of really high level important decisions from a technical perspective. I serve as fractional CTO to a few of our clients who are in need of kind of that technical leadership, but don't necessarily need to pay for a full time
Mhm.
CTO with the kind of experience you and I have. But I am, yes, I am deeply technical, and I still
Cool.
write code every now and again.
So, if you started 6 to 7 years ago, it was all about machine learning, reinforced learning, deep learning, all of that stuff. That's, nobody really even tried to understand from the mass audience. It was like
That's
rocket science.
that's exactly right. It was really actually it was challenging back then selling these services because it just felt like magic. Like clients did not understand it. One of the very first projects that we did was exactly that, right? It was neural networks, it was machine learning, and sprinkle in a little bit of computer vision into this particular project as well, where we were using imagery to authenticate luxury goods or find forged items.
Oh.
Um, so think like you want to buy a Gucci handbag on eBay, but you want to make sure it's not a fake. Being able to do that using machine learning and computer vision at scale, that was one of the very first. That was back when it was really hard to do something
Hmm.
like that. We didn't have all the infrastructure. We didn't have all these open source tools and toolkits, and there was no Databricks, there was no Snowflake. Like it was a lot harder back then. I mean,
Like
they were probably around, but
TensorFlow, stuff like that.
yeah, TensorFlow I think was like brand new, and so
Mhm.
it was really hard to do projects like that at that time. It was also really hard to sell them to clients because, again, it was too complex to really explain, um, and not very many people, even the people that use this technology, don't even understand it all that well. And so there was a big gap. Now things have changed, and even though people don't understand it, they understand that they need to pay attention to it and to be
Mhm.
finding people that do understand it to start using it. So it's been really nice. It was an uphill slog for a long time, but now it's like all anyone wants to talk about is how we're using some of mostly generative AI, but there's a lot of machine learning and other types of data science work to be done at these organizations these days.
I wonder, so when we speak about that a company wants to adopt an AI, make something with it, nowadays it sounds more like the companies want to connect to OpenAI and make some fancy like agents and that makes decisions. But in reality, like from your perspective, what's the actual ratio of just connecting to OpenAI, building agents, and that the more real AI building with machine learning, that with your own data, fine tuning by yourself, like companies like you?
It's a very good question. Um, and what I'm seeing for a lot of companies is their employees are not allowed to use OpenAI. The reason being they are dealing in confidential client information, confidential customer information that they cannot and will not expose to a third party system the way that OpenAI is set up, the way that ChatGPT is set up.
Mhm.
Um, and so, in that scenario where companies want to leverage large language models specifically and like RAG databases and that kind of thing, right? But they want to connect it with, let's say, company wide databases or confidential client documentation or third-party APIs that are specific to their where they have their own account and their own information in there. OpenAI is not a solution for that. ChatGPT is not a good solution for that. There's way too many problems. And so what we're seeing, and a good example of this is actually, they just announced it last week. It's called GSAI. Goldman Sachs just rolled out to 10,000 of their bankers and traders and other employees an in-house AI assistant, but the one that's trained on all of their proprietary data. Right? They didn't announce like a partnership. They are using OpenAI for some stuff, but they're also using Llama, and they're also using I want to say Mistral, and they're running in-house RAG databases because they can't store these documents on third-party systems because they're confidential. And I think we're going to see a ton of that. I'm already seeing that, where we want it to be in-house, stored on our private cloud servers or on-premise or whatever, with an open source model that we can tune, where we can pull in all of our proprietary and or confidential information and contextualize that and vectorize it and make it queryable and all the rest of it. Have it remain up to date with our database in real time through connectors, and enable our employees to be able to engage with this assistant or these agents in particular specific workflows, and might even have our own user interface that facilitate workflows that needs more than just a chat assistant, right? And sometimes you need an agent to go perform a task in a separate system, and how are those connected? And I think that Meta, OpenAI, these players are really focused on the foundational model, which we need them to be. But there's the whole application layer. There's still just a ton of need. And building these general UIs and applications on top of their LLMs, they're not getting the job done. And unless OpenAI and others start focusing on that, which they might, but I don't think they're really all that focused on that right now, then companies like my own have a place to be a facilitator. Like we're not telling companies, hey, you need to train your own foundational large language model. That's silliness. But what we're saying is we need to leverage them in a way that is tailored for your business, to make it so that people who don't even know what a large language model is still have a safe place where they can go ask for help. And like, it's that simple. I like to use the example of, you've got an employee and they just want to know if their dental plan covers Invisalign. Right now that takes an HR person like a decent amount of time to figure out. Oh, okay, well, let's look her up in our HR platform. Let's see what packages she signed up for. Okay, where's the documentation for their benefit? Maybe have to make like that. Should not take humans a few hours to do anymore. Like there's no reason.
True.
But we can't use OpenAI for that either. We can't use ChatGPT for that either, because we're not putting all of Sally's confidential HR information into those systems. And that's what I'm seeing. That's the space that we're operating in right now. And I'm already seeing it. We already have clients that are building tools like this. And I think it's the future. I think 5 years from now, every business will have one or many assistants and agents that are customized and tailored for their business with their proprietary data as part of that equation. And it's not going to be hosted on some third-party LLM foundational site. That's my theory, at least. I hope. I'm betting the farm on it.
Yeah, interesting. I'll tell an example, and I'm interested. What's your take on it? So I've seen, I think even today, a video where the guy claims he's automating like using N8N, like a Zapier
Hmm.
thingy. And he is using agents and using OpenAI. And he told how he basically got rid of the full-time employee for the company because he replaced it with full automation. And the thing was that it was a healthcare company. And what was happening, so he made, so when the appointment is booked, it sends an email. Then after some time it sends an SMS. If they confirm, it goes the route like a happy path. And after treatment, it sends basically a questionnaire. Did you like it? For the feedback. If the feedback is good, it sends Google Business link to leave stars. And after that, it sends a discount code. But if they need to change the time, it reschedules the whole treatment procedure and then basically gets back to the first step to confirm, and send SMS or so on, so on. For me, it sounds like the case that you just described how it should not be done. Uh, have you seen any examples like that? Because it seems like they are kind of exposing medical data already.
Right. Like that strikes me as in violation of HIPAA to start with. But even if it's not illegal, it certainly sounds risky and dangerous. And that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about here, right?
Mhm.
People don't appreciate the risks and they don't understand that by uploading, by providing these companies with this information, they don't understand that they're exposing their customers and their clients to like major breaches in their privacy, especially in medical. Like they shouldn't be anywhere near it at all. Um, I mean, just the other day, there were a couple of employees at the Pentagon using DeepSeek, which
Mhm.
is insanity, right? But people need to be educated on this. They don't really understand what all the dangers and risks are. But yeah, I mean, to the person that you mentioned, they seem to be exposing medical information to third parties in a way that would not be HIPAA compliant. But there's a way to do what they're doing. They just need to take a slightly more thoughtful approach to privacy and security.
Mhm.
And it'd be a little bit more work, yes, or more costly. But at the end of the day, that's a system that scales and that protects your customers or your patients' data in a way that like using GPT does not.
True, true. But I think sometimes it might seem like a problem if you look into Amazon servers that are like with GPUs. The starting prices are, if I'm correct, about $1,800 to
Mm-hmm.
just get it running. I think that's a bare minimum. So if you want like a decent, let's say, Llama latest to be running there, it probably will be in thousands, like way more than 1,800. So how much it could get, you know, let's say even in such an example, which just gets confirmations, writes an email, changes few things, uh, you know, to give as an example, maybe it's not a huge company, let's say small medium business, what to imagine. I think it's not only me who has this question, because how expensive it could get.
Yeah, another good question. It can get very expensive, but there are a few good ways to mitigate the expense. One is that, like in the use case that you're describing, I wonder if the only reason you need a large language model there is so that a non-technical user could set that up. You could do all that by writing code and not even need a language model for that.
Yeah,
So
yes, definitely.
that's one. Two, everybody's tends to use the newest models, which I understand why, we're used to saying, well, I'm sure the iPhone 18 will be better than the iPhone 17, so I'm going to use the 18, or I want that. But you know, everybody's got a mini version of their model. There's the 70 billion parameter and the
Mm-hmm.
3 billion or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that we are like asking PhDs, the recipe for meatloaf, right? And when we're doing that, we're spending way too much, either we're on API fees or we've over engineered our architecture and we've got a cluster of who knows how many, GPUs for something that like doesn't require that kind of horsepower. Now, at a big company, yes, you're going to have to spend to get a
Mm-hmm.
system like this. You are. It's not cheap yet, but yet being the operative word there, I think, just like it always has been, compute will get cheaper and cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Additionally, these models are really starting to focus on efficiency. We're seeing, I mean, what was it? 3.0 Mini came out yesterday, or
Yeah.
um, there's a big focus on efficiency, both for a lot of reasons. One is for the cost of the business use case, but another is just general concern about availability of natural resources and like the geopolitical climate that we're in, relying on you know massive data centers with hundreds of thousands of chips is risky because of the lack of control over our supply chain and other things. So there's even other reasons for them to really start focusing research energy on efficiency and efficient use of uh, these chips and this
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure that we need. And then the third kind of point I'll mention, I think I have a MacBook Pro, cost me about $3,000 used. Uh, Runs Llama great.
Yes,
Like
it does.
I run it locally using Olama. I use it from time to time when I just and so like zoom out on that. What am I actually saying? Like I actually predicted this last year and it's kind of come to fruition, but I still think it's happening, which is that
Mm-hmm.
running models like on the edge or like locally is going to really start to make a lot of sense. Like imagine, okay, so in your scenario, you're like, okay, well, we have this cloud hosted web application that needs to live on AWS and needs very powerful chips so that the
Mm-hmm.
entire company can be using um, this system. That's one architecture. Uh, but imagine a desktop app that comes bundled with an open source version of a large language model and some connectors that lives on your machine.
I think some does. What's the name of VS Code extension that's very popular?
Oh, Copilot.
Yeah. So I think that one is already running
It
a
is.
model. Yes.
It is. Yeah, I use it. So I think that's an architecture that we're going to see more of as like we'll call them AI PCs, like personal computers that are architected to be able to run models. We're already seeing it. NVIDIA announced their new one at CES this year, which is coming out in like May. I forget the name of it. Um, but I think a proliferation of personal computers that can run models locally
Mm-hmm.
is going to be an important piece of the cost reduction here. Because you're already buying machines for your employees.
True.
And so by buying machines that are good enough, you're going to greatly reduce your cloud compute cost because there's not a per unit cost when you buy a machine. right?
Hmm.
It's almost like the pendulum swung really far to cloud, where it was like, oh, everything's got to be on the cloud, cloud everything, right? Eh, I'm not, like maybe we went a little too far with the cloud thing. Sometimes it makes sense for things to be on premise,
Yeah.
you know?
Build a rack. It will be like 15,000, 20,000 tops to get
Right. And how long
started.
is that going to last you compared to what you would pay in cloud compute, which is variable based on usage? There is a very strong argument right now that owning hardware is a good financial strategy now.
I agree. I agree. I was even thinking also it might make sense to build like a rack which could have multiple GPUs. Let's say add couple 16 VRAM chips,
Mm-hmm.
and that should be pretty decent start. And start using it, and you get to the office, turn it on if you need it. You can keep it always on. Depends on the use case, but it sounds like it wouldn't be that expensive. But if you use it, let's say 24/7, you would, even like with OpenAI, you would definitely pay that amount in probably like 3 months or two
Mm-hmm.
months,
Yeah,
maybe
just
even sooner.
yeah, yeah. I think so. So I'm already seeing little anecdotal examples of this happening where or even just like in my own work, my own day to day as I'm experimenting and I'm making choices about, oh, am I going to use an OpenAI assistant for this, or am I going to run it locally on Llama? And it's like, well, it's going to be a lot cheaper on Llama. Might take me a few more hours to get it set up, but at the end of the day, if I'm going to be using this a lot, I'd rather spend a few more hours and not have to pay for credits.
Definitely, not talking about months. It's
Right.
just a few hours
Yeah.
difference. So
Right. Because everything's gotten so easy.
true, true. Yeah, now install Olama, and I think, does it pull it by itself, all those models, or
Mm-hmm.
you need to? It
Well,
pulls
you
it.
have to pick which ones you want to pull, but yeah, it'll. I mean, a simple Googling install Olama on Mac OS. It's like anybody could do it. You do
You
not
can
need to
ask
be a developer.
ChatGPT or Cloud
You're right.
Desktop
Yeah, I
app to
just
install
ask them
it.
how to do it, and they'll tell you. Um, yeah, so it's like I think that and also there's like Gemini now, right? So if my company's on G Suite,
Hmm.
like we are, um, we just have Gemini now, and it's in our Google Docs, it's in our
Mm.
Gmail, it's in all the G Suite tools, or it's rolling out to most of them, and we're not paying per credit for that stuff. So educating employees about the appropriate tools to use for the various different kinds of tasks. Um, if you just need help drafting an email, you don't need anything more than Gemini. If you need to include confidential private information, then we need a local private system for that. If you just need somebody to generate like pretty deep research on a particular
Hmm.
area, go use ChatGPT because they are the best at that, and a lot of other things. But like knowing that the nuances there that are ever changing, I think is one of the biggest organizational challenges we're seeing right now. Is like I read an hour to two per day because it is my job to stay up to date on these types of things. But
Hmm.
I do not feel up to date. I do not feel like an expert. And I have to read so much every day, and I still feel like I'm behind. So how do we get completely non-technical people in a position where they can use and leverage these tools to become more efficient without making like kind of these really grave mistakes? That's one of the big challenges in front of us right
Maybe it's a good thing for you and me. No.
now. Yeah, I think it is. I think there's a place for guys like you and me, and for companies like Barefoot, because we're at an existential crisis moment right now in the custom software development world, right? I am in a custom software development agency. I am in the business of selling development hours of work to my clients. That's how we've always worked. And all of a sudden, what used to take 100 hours might take 10. Does that mean that I only get to bill for 10 hours? Because that's pretty problematic. And so, and it's not just my industry that's facing this issue. I mean, lawyers have the same problem. Lawyers, they bill hours. And all of a sudden the world knows that what used to take so many hours might take 20 or 30% of that now because of the tools available to them. And they're asking for cheaper prices because of it. And so
True.
where I see the future of Barefoot and fractional CTO work and any of it is like the implementation of these systems is not easy yet. It's actually quite complex. There's a ton of challenges around getting them deployed and getting them used appropriately and securely across an organization is still very, very hard. And so that's where we are focused as a company right now, is building systems like that and deploying them in production environments for businesses. That's where I think our future is.
Sounds likely. Yeah, makes sense. Well, even like a lot of people talking that it will take a job from developers themselves because like Cloud codes really well. I tried, I liked it. It's really good. DeepSeek, I heard that, haven't tried myself, but that it can code really well. But in my opinion, it will be even more work for devs actually, but probably not juniors, but at least mids and seniors. But because everybody will know that you can use, let's say, ChatGPT to code fast, and then devs will have 30 projects and 30 different deadlines. Because
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's easy, you just use ChatGPT, but now you will have 30 projects instead of one.
Yes. Um, so it's a really interesting thing. It's something I think about a lot. There are certain types of developers that we're not going to need anymore soon, or like already. One that comes to mind is like a purely front end developer. Like if you're working in React, and your part of the project pipeline is taking a Figma design and then delivering the React components for the user interface, we're very close to not needing, we just needing somebody to oversee that, but saving hundreds of hours. We're like
Yes.
right there. So I would not want to be a front end developer right now. I don't think your job security is very good. Backend is a lot harder, I would say. And that's where, yeah, I think companies will expect productivity gains
Mm-hmm.
by, when sometimes backend developers have to do really boring, tedious, time consuming tasks. That's not a good use of their time. But it's also not the kind of thing where you're like, I'm going to hand off this little piece to this junior person, but it's all up in my thing, which is much more, you don't do that. You just do it, even though it's annoying and tedious. And so getting rid of like that kind of part of the work and making that go fast, I think is a fair expectation given where things are right now.
True.
But the fact of the matter is that we have years of where we need engineers to use the tools. Like you take a non-technical person, doesn't understand how a web application works, as an example. Sure, go ask ChatGPT to write code. Then what?
How are you
Like what
gonna
do you?
scale it?
Yeah, what are you going to do with that? There's like there's just a whole host of other skills, some of them even soft skills and architecture and things like that that are necessary to actually deploy things that work in a production environment that we're not there yet. As a helper to developers, absolutely. Absolutely. But like the idea that we can just build software applications in just using written language we still have quite a ways to go before we get there.
So everybody needs to have like really good foundations in that field to even know if it's hallucinating or not. Like, are you getting the actual good answer, or it's some
Mm-hmm.
nonsense? I, for example, tried in Java to write workers that get synchronized through Redis in multi-server environment, like a cloud auto scaling. Different
Mm-hmm.
workers, all the tasks are grouped and has only one thread. So it was nightmare. It was just a nightmare to get. And I was
Right.
thinking, I probably would have written it myself way,
Way better and
way
faster.
better. Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was just this morning, like 2 hours ago, in a meeting where I've got somebody that's using ChatGPT to write like tool definitions for an OpenAI assistant for tool calling. And he was like, but I want to do it at scale, but I want to make sure that they're working. So they use Claude to write unit tests for these things. And then what he said was, but then my unit test kept failing. And I had no idea whether or not it was because the unit tests were created poorly or the original code was created poorly. And so then he had to go troubleshoot all of that to figure out what actually was happening. And it was like, I could have just written it myself faster. But what I'm seeing, and so I left this part out of my bio, but I actually sold a controlling interest in Barefoot in 2019. I have a parent company based out of Warsaw, and there's 1,500 engineers at that organization. And I was talking to their CFO recently, and I was like, hey, I'm really curious what the usage is like, what the adoption has been for the engineers, kind of across the organization. And what I heard was junior devs use it a lot, mid levels use it every once in a while. The experts almost never even touch it because they're still better, faster than dealing with all the problems and hallucinations and bugs and whatnot that you end up getting if you're trying to use the models.
Sure. Well, if you like expert level, I think if you need to take a different language or different tools, I found it very effective. So if you consult with it like a other senior colleague, you just ask stupid questions. What is this? How I'm supposed to connect it? How it
Right.
works?
In Python, I use a colon for this, but the colon's not working.
Exactly.
What's the syntax? Like just stuff like that.
Yeah, like how these annotations are working, like where I'm supposed to even look for implementation, something
Right.
like this.
Right. I have found it to be helpful in that kind of thing. I will say an interesting success story as a little side project. I have cryptocurrency trading bots that I wrote the code for them myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the Solana blockchain upgraded to mainnet beta v2 like a couple 2-3 months ago, and it broke my bots, broke them, and I did not have time to go figure out what to do, and I very literally said to in Visual Studio Code, my Copilot add-on, I said, they just launched a new version of this. Here's the documentation. I'm getting errors. Can you upgrade this code base for this new version? And I did not have to edit one thing. It did it, and I said, well, this will be interesting. I'm just going to hit run. I'm just going to F5.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? They just were up and running again, and I have not had any issues with them. That for me was like a moment where it was like, oh man, this is coming, and it's coming fast, because that is incredible that it can do that already.
True. Yeah, but we need to really think what we're going to do.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so another question. So AI is often seen like a silver bullet. Like it can write you tests, it can write anything, like draft legal documents, all sorts of things. But where do you think it's overhyped and misapplied in businesses? Like, have you seen companies that like forces the use of AI, for the sake it's like a hype?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had people send me like project plans or business plans or some other kind of types of documentation that you might like, maybe for a startup, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
where it was just nonsense because they seem to have thought that like they could just say write me a business plan and then just like send it off to people without even proofreading it. Like, so literally parts of them were nonsense,
Mm-hmm.
or like that's not even a thing that exists. Like I had a proposed project plan that referenced some brand new technology that wasn't a thing, not a real company, that nothing there. Took me a while to figure that out. And so this is not at the organizational level, this is at the individual level. I feel like people don't understand that these tools, when you're talking about content production, they only get you 70 or 80% of the way there.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to put in some work. These are not copy paste jobs, and people are forgetting that, and they're making themselves look very, very silly in the process. I feel like larger organizations are being a lot more cautious about rolling things out. They're more likely to err on the side of not using them at all out of fear of what might. You hear little stories about companies getting sued
Mm-hmm.
because of hallucinating chat bots and bereavement policies for airlines and things like that. And so it makes, business leaders cautious, rightfully so, I would say. Um, and so I have not seen uh, them like forcing their users, or their employees rather, to use this stuff. I do think uh, overhype right now, as someone who has not used Sora yet, is video. Video
Mm-hmm.
sucks. Like, video generation is terrible right now. And people, I think people think we're further along with video than we really are,
It,
where it's like 5-10 second clips, or like nonsense, or the movement is so awkward, or that's not how physics works, like all that stuff, or there's a third arm. Like, it's still very, very early days in video, and I think people think we're further along than we really are.
but there are so many TikTok videos or Insta Reels with those demos that are super worked out, and made
Yeah.
to look impressive and brilliant, and you sign up and it like make me a movie.
And it's like garbage, the output, right?
Yes.
Like, who knows if they even used their systems to build those demos, or how much post production work was required to make them that slick. But they're not coming
Mhm.
out slick like that. I can tell you
No,
that much.
you need to be really good in editing
Right.
what's coming out of it,
Right.
and it's like, they don't tell that part of the story that I've seen one video how they make it. It is like weeks of work with it, and you generate a picture. Like, you need to generate a picture from all the sides, like in all possible like ways. Then you feed those pictures, and you generate like tens or 100 video clips, and then you need to select it, and then you modify it. So it's like tedious job. It's like a lot of work to get it look decent, and
Mm-hmm.
still like you can see it's AI, but to
Yep.
even get there, how much you need to put the effort in.
Right. Right. It's like, there's like layers of more complex types of content, right? And there's text, and then there's images, and then there's video.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we've gotten really good at text. We've gotten decent with images. Not, I mean, we've gotten pretty good, but like, and then we're just not there yet with video. And it all, it's just like the amount of bytes,
Yeah.
of those three different things are on different scales of magnitude. And so the amount of compute and the logic of the math behind it all has to be more sophisticated as you kind of move up that chain of the more complex objects, from text to imagery to video.
True. True. Uh, Another question. So, what was the most unexpected industry or a use case that you worked with in, implementing AI and where it actually worked out? Maybe something you wouldn't think of, like, right. I know you had.
Yeah, I'll tell you a really interesting one. It's really niche, and I can't tell you who it was for.
Mm-hmm.
But a leading uh, golf brand. Okay, you
Okay.
can go to a country club and do a custom fitting of golf clubs, which is where you sit down, or not sit down, but you go to the driving range with a golf pro. They hook up a machine that it measures all your swing data, your ball spin, loft, velocity. They give you a bunch of different clubs to try out, and then at the end of the session, they recommend a set of clubs for you that are like custom fit for you, that are going to be the ideal um, set of clubs for you. And they've been doing this for many years, and they have a lot of data around their swing and the shot and the clubs that were tried and the clubs that were ultimately recommended by these golf pros. And we got in there and took a look and said, I bet we can predict what a golf pro would say based on all this stuff.
Nice.
And we can, with sufficiently high degree of accuracy, such that now you can do a custom fitting, but you don't need the golf pro. You could just go into a sporting goods store and do it with software and like a rig. So that's not even generative AI, that's machine learning, but
Mm-hmm.
man, that's cool.
Yes, it is.
To be like, to just say, all right, hit these clubs, and now here's the perfect set of golf clubs for you based on very sophisticated data set. This is not just rule based, if this then that. It's machine learning.
But this must have been like so much effort to train it. Like you had to swing the club so many times and like
Oh, we
hit the
had no, we
ball.
had
Like,
all the historical data.
but they were filming it all the time.
Well, no, not filming. Well, so there's a device that,
Oh,
yeah,
like a
that
radar.
yeah. Well, it's not. It's very specific to golf,
Mm-hmm.
that measures a wide variety of things about your swing and your shot, that was always set up. It was always part of one of these custom fitting sessions that they did. They did this for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
Thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people have done these custom fittings.
Right.
So they already had the historical data to be able to do it. We didn't have to generate it.
The good thing was that they organized it well, I guess. Like what was the measurements and what was the outcome? What was the final recommendation from that pro?
If the data was a disaster, the project would have never succeeded.
Definitely. That good choice to collect all the data you can, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
What? How do you approach, like, let's say if some CEO, like potential client says, so how do I make sure that AI revenue will be a drive, like AI will be a revenue driver, not a cost center for all the business?
That is the core principle of our offering right now. ROI and AI. How are we getting a return on this stuff? Because for a long time now, it's been, not a long time, but relative, it's kind of just like a toy, the plaything. It's
Hmm.
interesting. Isn't this neat that this can do this? But it has not been a meaningful revenue driver or cost reducer for most companies yet. I think this is the year. And there's two things that we really think are important. One is a formal ROI calculation before you start anything. Okay. It's not always exactly obvious how to do that, but there are ways to figure that out. For example, I think we can save 6 hours per week for this group of employees, which amounts to this much salary, right? That's a nice calculation of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you have to measure it after you launch it. You have to have a plan for measuring it before you start building it. And because of that, you need, and this is to me the biggest mistake I'm seeing. It starts off as an R&D thing, but the plan on how to actually deploy it across the organization was not determined ahead of time. And you end up building something that isn't what is needed to deploy it into a production environment. I read somewhere something crazy like the percentage of models that are considered successful by data science standards that don't make it into production are like 80 or 90% of them because of failure of like business practices to be aligned with the R&D work that's happening on the data science team to say, well, this is cool, but this is not what we need for this to be valuable at our organization. There's a really a good book. I think I have it. This one, the AI Playbook. It talks a lot about that.
Interesting.
And it lays out like a nice framework. It calls it BizML on how to deploy these projects or how to plan for these projects such that once the proof of concept is complete, there's a plan for getting it deployed and generating the return. I would say that of the two options of either revenue generating or cost saving, the cost saving use case is a lot more proven out than the revenue generating one. And it feels safer to me versus trying to generate new revenue, which is much more difficult to forecast than cutting costs are because you already know your costs.
Yes, it's proof based already. You can calculate all of it, even like pessimistic scenarios, optimistic scenarios, like all of that stuff with some new revenue. It's like a startup,
Right.
random guess. You don't really know.
It's finger in the air, make a guess, but you really don't know until you start to get your data.
Got it. All right. So we're getting near the end of our time. And final question. So, what do you think? What are the outdated business assumptions or understanding that now AI forcing leaders to rethink?
So I think about this in a few different ways. In terms of, and I go out and I speak to CEO groups and things like this, and this is the kind of the message that I bring, which is really, I would say, three things, and these are like practical use cases that business leaders need to be doing these things this year. One, sales and marketing is changing completely, and you need to be using these tools or you are going to get smoked by the people that are. So your sales and marketing team should probably be one of the first to lean into generative tools because the risk is a lot lower for them than it is for some of the other folks in your organization. So that's one. Two, a question I like to leave business leaders with is, what would be valuable for you to be able to predict? What is something that if you could predict it, you could make money off of? And in one of these talks, I had a photographer, very famous, world famous photographer, been on the cover of Surfing magazine more than any other photographer. And, he raised his hand and said, well, I take like 1 million photos, but I only produce like 10 or 20 of them a year. And I don't have any clue whether or not they're going to be commercially successful. Would that be something that I would be able to predict? And so by just like posing that question, like what would be valuable to predict? And do you have historical data on that thing? That's a good, like you need to be building a prediction engine for that thing. And it's not that hard anymore. You don't need PhDs for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the second thing. And the third thing, again, very practical. And if I were to build a new startup today, this might be an area where I would focus. Is there's a tremendous amount of what I would call traditional businesses that all they do is push paper. They're reading, collating, combining, sending documentation, generating documentation. I'll give you a couple examples. Escrow services, appraisers. So those are both in real estate, but there's a number of industries that's all they do. IP attorneys, they just read and write.
Mm-hmm.
Those businesses need massive disruption from tech. Now it's ready. Now our code can understand documents. Like I remember when pulling a single field out of a PDF file that was scanned manually was almost impossible as a developer. It was prohibitively expensive to be able to do that at scale, unless the PDFs were perfectly pixel organized. That's not the case anymore. It's really trivial now to understand documents, to be able to use code to write questions about documents and answer, and generate new content about these documents. And so if you are in a business that's pushing a lot of paper or documentation around, the technology is ready for you today. And if you're not doing it, your competitor will be doing it. So it's time to get moving on that. So those are just the three areas where almost every business has, like established business that's been around for a while, has at least one, if not all three of those categories of where we can start applying this tech today to drive revenue or cut costs, which again is the goal here. This is a tool for business to make money, or at least that's how I'm looking at it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. So we learned quite a lot. We learned that OpenAI is not the silver bullet for everything. And it would be, in many occasions, wiser to even potentially have it hosted on your own servers or even on the premise. And many more things. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the audience?
No, I thank you again for having me, and I'll say if you want to explore what any of these things might look like for your organization, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love talking about this kind of thing and looking for opportunities like that. And so please don't hesitate to hit me up.
You will be able to find the link in the description. So LinkedIn, maybe,
Perfect. LinkedIn would
and
be
the
great,
website.
and the website. And I'd love to talk.
Awesome. So thank you very much. It was really interesting. It was really pleasant conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience also learned. And who's watching or listening, so subscribe and don't miss the next episode. We'll learn something new again.
Mm.
All right.